Today was Todd Engle's restitution hearing at the federal courthouse in Las Vegas, Nevada. Judge Navarro was on the bench. Mr. Markowitz represented Todd, and Dan Sheese was representing the government. First off, Judge Navarro notified everyone in the court that Todd was actually granted his request for no transportation to Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm not sure what the details of that were, but she did grant it, and for some reason the communication didn't get to the Bureau of Prisons in time or something, so he was subsequently transported, and so the hearing did go ahead and go forward. This was basically to determine the restitution that Todd is responsible for based off of the guilty charges in his conviction of the two crimes. So this will be a short rundown since court only lasted about an hour. I'll give you a little bit of commentary at the end about the environment in the courtroom, because per Bundy standard operational procedure, it was a joke. So Markowitz made a couple of arguments first, cited a little bit of appellate case law, was trying to basically make the argument that the government is not entitled to restitution because restitution states that it's only to a business, an individual, a victim. I don't know, I kind of thought it was a very weak argument. Mr. Sheese stood up shortly thereafter and said that Markowitz was misapplying the law and the facts, which I happen to agree with Mr. Sheese, and that's not because I dislike or disagree with the Bundys or anyone else. It's because I read the law. So what was at stake is basically compensation for the BLM and compensation for the FBI. Mr. Sheese referenced the Mandatory Victim Restitution Act. They talked about general restitution versus mandatory, and based off of the conviction of Todd's crimes, his restitution is mandatory. The law actually requires that the restitution is applied without consideration of economic circumstances. And then they went ahead and cited the section of the law that was applicable to. So whether the court wanted to or not, the law requires that the restitution is mandatory. So at the end, the court's finding was that the restitution is mandatory because of the violent offense. His ability to pay or not pay is not a consideration. So the FBI was asking for costs of travel, costs plus travel, necessary expenses, and the BLM was basically requesting the same. The judge determined that those expenses were identifiable, reasonable, and appropriate, and that restitution is not limited to persons, victims. She listed a couple of other things, but restitution can actually be paid to companies and governments, that they can also be victims. And I did find it interesting that during the back and forth between Markowitz and Mr. Sheese, that Markowitz actually stood up and started making the government's case for them, stating that the government doesn't magically produce money and stick it in a bank account, that it actually belongs to the taxpayers. So what I would have liked to hear Mr. Sheese stand up and say is that the taxpayers are actually the victim, not the FBI nor the BLM, because it is the taxpayers that had to foot the bill for this entire escapade. So she determined that the project costs for both the FBI and the BLM were interfered with by Todd. There was some discrepancy going back and forth about what days he showed up and at what point in time his presence actually disrupted the operation, but that is not what the judge made her determination on. The presence was not germane to the argument. That Engle's intent was to unwind the events, basically the actions that the BLM and the FBI had taken in impounding the cattle and any maneuvers that they had done up to that point. And Todd's intent was to unwind those events. So therefore, he was responsible regardless of what time frames that he was actually there. So the monetary breakdown for the BLM for labor and contract labor for outside help, I believe that's the contract cowboys that they're talking about out of Utah, was $1.5 million. For the FBI, and there were two agencies, Las Vegas and Los Angeles. So for Las Vegas, it was $62,255. For Los Angeles, hard expenses were $18,405, and travel expenses were $11,631. So roughly $92,291 for the FBI, which brought the grand total to $1.6 million roughly. The method of payment is to be $50 a quarter, so that's not very much. It's deducted from the Bureau of Prisons, and many of the Bundyites were, murmuring, saying, oh, well, how's he going to pay that? He doesn't have any money. Well, it's very simple. When you're in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, you have a job, and you get paid for that job, and approximately 10% of his earnings will be deducted from that money before it ever sees him, and the Bureau of Prisons will actually forward it for him. So the payment will be made, and like I said, it's only $50 a quarter. So for you poots who are actually tuning in secretly, that's a quarter is 3 months. So 4 times a year he'll make a $50 payment, so roughly $200 a year. At the end, he did request that he be moved to Sheridan, Oregon. The judge did go ahead and grant that, so the recommendation of the court is that Todd is going to be moved to Sheridan, Oregon. Apparently his family is going to relocate there. Okay, so now about the atmosphere of the courtroom. So low turnout of poots. Cliven and Carol were there. The marshals decided that they wanted to have, since it was a small group, that they wanted to have everyone sit on one side of the room, which that happened to be behind the government. I had to sit basically in the middle of the maggot pit. One person was nice, an elderly lady, and the rest of the Bundys sat there and heckled and harassed the entire time, as they did at the end, as Mr. Sheese and the FBI agent were walking out, calling him an evil man. I hope you sleep well at night. Their behavior is completely inappropriate. It's juvenile, it's childish, it accomplishes nothing, and it's merely for a matter of show. The Bundys don't give a crap about Todd Engle or how much money he's going to have to pay, and this is evidenced by the fact that they were sitting there saying, oh, well, how's he going to pay that? His family doesn't have any money. They're going to steal his commissary. I mean, just ridiculous statements, but never once did they say, oh, well, we'll contribute to that, or we'll help make a payment, or we'll sell a cow and we'll donate the cow. So I don't know. I hope that by me reporting this, that it actually shames them into taking some responsibility for fraudulently calling all of these people across the nation to bring their guns and have a showdown with the federal government, and never once considering the consequences of their actions, and the fact that it really has financially devastated a lot of families and taken the freedom away from men that really thought someone was, in trouble. The Bundys cried rape, and there was no rape. So the women really are the worst. They sit there and they get away with everything and anything they can because they're not civilized people. They're heathens. They act like it. So that's pretty much the wrap up for today. We still have Blaine Cooper's hearing coming up next week, so we'll wait for that one.